Okay, very good morning, students. Yeah, so we are talking about controlling microorganisms, and in the last class, I talked about the three main categories of agents. Is Dhwani there? Let me just see. Mhm. Okay. Uh, we talked about the mechanical agent, and there we talked about filtration. So, how membrane filtration and depth filtration are used. These are the two types of filters that are used for mechanical separation. Today, we'll take up physical and chemical agents and also some factors which affect the use of these agents. Um, in physical agents, I'll be talking about heat and radiation as well as pressure in one case as an agent. We have already talked about low temperature, so refrigeration and desiccation. In fact, we have covered in our earlier lectures in when we were talking about factors affecting microbial growth. So, starting with heat. Heat can be used for sterilization in two ways. So it's an effective means of and a very popular means of sterilization. Um, you can either use dry heat sterilization or moist heat or steam sterilization, and both have their own mechanism of action and application with their own advantages. Dry heat, it kills microorganisms by burning. So basically oxidation of proteins and other biomolecules. And in the lab, you will find incinerators like a Bunsen burner, which you've already seen, I guess, during your school times, or the hot air oven, which is also used for dry heat sterilization. The Bunsen burner is used for sterilization of the inoculating loops or the glass spreaders that we saw in the last class for no class before last for spreading and streaking. While hot air oven, if they're maintained for a temperature of like about 170 degree, in 2 hours they completely sterilize glassware which are used for experiments. Usually, it is seen that dry heat requires longer exposure time, and I'm comparing it to moist heat sterilization. But it is preferred, dry heat is preferred for those items which can be damaged by moist heat, because moist heat can be corrosive. So, for some metal instruments, you would prefer to sterilize using dry heat. And even for items that are impenetrable to moist heat, for example, certain petroleum products or certain powders wherein you cannot use moist heat. Other than this, the advantage of dry heat is that it's very easy to operate. These are very simple equipments that you have or you will come across in the lab. The only disadvantage here is the longer time of exposure required compared to the moist heat. Then well, moist heat is used in the form of water vapor, like I said, steam to kill microorganisms, and boiling we have been practicing as a classic example since ages. Under moist heat treatment, the mechanism of sterilization is different here. The microbial proteins undergo irreversible denaturation, unlike just burning in the last case, that is the dry heat. And most of the vegetative cells, they are killed within just a couple of minutes. But for spores, of course, a longer duration is required, maybe in the order of hours for destruction of bacterial spores. Now, moist heat in the presence of a pressure, if you apply, it is more effective with penetration and better coverage. And also to reach the required temperature, it's easier. Such kind of sterilization is done conventionally in pressure cookers, and a larger form of which is going to be used by you all in the form of an autoclave that you see on the right side. Um, so autoclave is a high pressure device in which steam is superheated under a pressure of 15 pounds per square inch and a temperature of 121 degree, and you maintain it to for 15 minutes. So these numbers are crucial when you're working with autoclave: 15 pounds per square inch, 121 degree, and 15 minutes. This is a standard program that is set. You will very commonly encounter it. Almost all our experiments will start with your sterilization of the medium that you will be performing in an autoclave. To monitor the effectiveness of steam sterilization, and obligate thermophile Geobacillus stearothermophilus spores are used as indicators. So what is done is an envelope with the spores are placed inside the autoclave when performing the run, and after the cycle is over, the spores are inoculated and incubated. So it's a biological indicator. If there is no growth, it means Geobacillus, it means proper sterilization has taken place. And this is, if not with every run, it's done on a regular basis to check the efficiency of the autoclave, maybe monthly basis or something. We don't do in the lab though. We have some other indicators, some indicator tapes that we use. But in most of the other labs, you would find, at least abroad, you will find that a regular check with this thermophile is done. This is just a comparative of the time required for sterilization at a particular temperature. So let's say at 121 degree, you will see that it requires only 15 minutes when exposed to moist heat, while it requires 600 minutes when you apply dry heat. So of all the methods available for sterilization, in the form of saturated steam under pressure is the most widely used and also the most reliable method because of all the advantages that I mentioned. In fact, if you remember the scale of resistance that I showed, the highest or the most resistant were prions, and if you use moist heat, even prions can be destroyed at about 32 degrees, approximately 5 hours. But like I said, of course, it cannot be used for instruments which are prone to corrosion or for some specific chemicals which are heat sensitive, moist heat sensitive. Another process related to using heat as a means of controlling microorganisms is pasteurization, and I'm sure you've heard this term. Here, precisely controlled heat is used on heat sensitive liquids. So therefore, the temperature is to be very precisely controlled. I'm talking about pasteurization of milk and other food products. Here, you note that the organisms, not all organisms are killed, so it is different from sterilization. You're only bringing down the count. And there are different types of pasteurization as well, depending on the temperature and duration of exposure. So you will see that as you increase the temperature, you are actually compromising with the milk quality as well. So of course, adversely, it will affect the quality of milk. Then, yeah, coming down to the next factor, which is radiation. Both ionizing and non-ionizing radiations have been used in controlling microorganisms. So from this spectrum, you can see that the energy of the radiation increases with a decrease in wavelength. So gamma rays and X-rays can ionize atoms and molecules and hence break chemical bonds. Even UV radiation above 10 eV, 10 electron volt, is considered ionizing, but UV is normally used as a non-ionizing radiation in sterilization. Ionizing radiation, they have a deep penetrating power with sufficient energy to cause electrons to leave their orbit so they can break DNA. They even subsequently inhibit cell division. They destroy cell components. They use in sterilizing medical supplies and implants and even food products. Cobalt-60 is the one which is very commonly used. In fact, irradiated food has been long debated, with people being skeptical of consuming food that is irradiated. Non-ionizing, as I said, they have limited penetration, and so non-ionizing radiation like UV is only used for decontamination of surfaces. UV is also able to excite electrons, so makes the bases unstable, which eventually lead to the formation of such dimers. And the most common ones are thymine dimers, which are formed. And this affects the DNA. This is a pyrimidine dimer, a kind of pyrimidine dimer. These dimers, they result in inhibition of DNA replication, ultimately leading to cell death. And in fact, they also promote mutations. So I'm sure you also know that UV exposure for you is harmful because of these dimers. In a laboratory, you will find a laminar flow cabinet or a laminar flow. In fact, all your experiments dealing with streaking, spreading, and port plate, even serial dilutions, you will be performing in such chambers. It is designed to prevent contamination of biological samples, somewhat like a biosafety cabinet. However, here it's a little less protective to the user as compared to the other one. Here, I'm showing you this because there's a combination of methods used for maintaining a sterilized environment. In this, the air is passed through HEPA filter, so mechanical separation of airborne contaminants to maintain sterile conditions, just like a biosafety cabinet. Uh, the laminar flow is also fitted with UV lights, which are switched on before a user starts working so as to sterilize the surface of the workbench and other small equipments that might also be placed in the chamber. In fact, we place our spreaders also in the inoculating loop as well, and then turn on the UV. When one starts working, a burner is lit inside for routinely decontaminating the inoculating loop or even heating up a flask before pouring the liquid medium or molten agar. So you will perform all these experiments, and in the UG lab, you will see that we have 3 of these laminar flows kept side by side. So you'll be working under these conditions. So this is the reason why I was looking for Dhwani to show her how we try to maintain the conditions in the lab. Dhwani, I hope you got this. Huh? Yeah. Now coming to the last set of agents, that is the chemical agents. They are generally not meant for sterilization. So they mostly bring down the microbial load to or remove pathogens from the object. They'll bring down the load to safe levels. And if you're looking for an ideal chemical agent, basically, yeah, you can understand it should have the shortest possible time. It should actually kill the microorganisms in the shortest possible time at a low concentration. It should be low in toxicity for the user and should not damage the material which is being treated. Also, it's preferable that it should show solubility in water or alcohol for application and have a broad spectrum. It should be penetrating, affordable, and easily available. These are some of the common properties that you look for. And depending on the chemical that you use, the mode of action of the chemical is different. So, for example, you could have chemical agents working directly on cell wall synthesis, or they can damage the cell wall which is already synthesized. They can also play with the cytoplasmic membrane permeability by disturbing certain transporters or just by disturbing the integrity of the membrane. Then physical and chemical state of some of the biomolecules, especially of proteins and nucleic acids, are also affected by certain agents. The inhibition of enzyme action is action, and the synthesis itself of these biomolecules also tends to be the mode of action for certain agents. We'll discuss some of the representative examples for each of these modes. Now there are 2 terms. There is MIC and MBC, wherein MIC is considered as a gold standard for determining the susceptibility of organisms. In fact, both of them are they're used under different conditions. So one is minimum inhibitory concentration, and the other one is minimum bactericidal concentration. It could even be fungicidal concentration depending on the agent that you use. Usually, you will so minimum inhibitory concentration is the lowest concentration of an antimicrobial agent that prevents visible growth of a microorganism. So it's inhibiting the microorganism. On the contrary, bactericidal, as the name suggests, it is the lowest concentration to achieve bactericidal defined as 99.9% reduction in the initial inoculum. And I'm not sure if you've come across some reports like this. This is a kind of report generated when you get your samples analyzed clinically. So the report presents a table which helps the physician determine the antibiotic to be administered. If you see, there's an SNR which says if it's sensitive or resistant, and the MIC value, that is the lowest possible, the lowest concentration at which it would inhibit the particular microorganism. So in a MIC-SA bacteria in liquid suspension, they are exposed to an antibiotic at various range. So at a particular in a twofold dilution basically. So 1 microg per ml, 0.5 microgram per ml, so on and so forth. And the lowest concentration that inhibits visible growth is called as the MIC. So the physician can accordingly decide the course of action or the course of antibiotics for the particular patient. These are two values which are important in terms of specialty chemical agents. Now there are different types of chemicals that have been used in controlling microorganisms, and you have in one or the other way you have come across almost each of these agents. We'll take examples of each. We will start with the one which is the oldest. In fact, this was first used by Joseph Lister in 1860s. Now what's important here is the mechanism, enzymes of microorganisms while denaturing the proteins. These include cresols like lysol, as well as several bisphenols. Bisphenols are particularly effective against Staphylococcus. And about 75% or more of antibacterial liquid hand soaps and about 30% of bar soaps, they contain a chemical called as triclosan, a bisphenolic. So this some years back, in fact, I've also posted a news article regarding this towards the end of the presentation. Some years back, the FDA banned soaps which are triclosan based due to the reports of adverse effect of triclosan. Another advantage with phenol is it's a very strong agent. Okay, at low concentrations, it's an antiseptic. At high concentration, it is a disinfectant. But another benefit here is that phenols are tuberculocidal. Now, if you remember the scale of resistance, I showed Mycobacterium tuberculosis way up in the scale for resistance. So this is also used as an indicator if a particular agent can kill Mycobacterium tuberculosis. So it is tuberculocidal. It also has good penetrating power. Penetrating power, matlab it can even work in conditions where there is a high organic matter present. And when we talk about factors, you will see how this is important. So these are some of the benefits of phenolics. However, it is quite irritating. I mean, the smell itself is quite irritating. So yeah, so this is the reason why you will most commonly see them under in disinfectants for cleaning surfaces. Then come into alcohols, which are another commonly used chemical for microbial control. They also work by denaturing proteins. They disrupt membranes. Alcohols, ethanol you saw was a part of the Gram staining procedure. So ultimately, it will lead to cell lysis. Alcohols are typically used at a concentration of about 70% aqueous solution, and in fact they work better in aqueous solution than 100% alcohol solution. So you will notice that even in labs when you work, you will be asked to maybe wipe your hands with 70% solutions. Why, you will tell me in the next class why alcohols work better at 70% than 100%. The most commonly used alcohols are for disinfection, of course, are ethanol and isopropyl alcohol. Alcohol tends to be bactericidal and fungicidal. Also, in certain cases, be virucidal, and especially for enveloped virus. So, corona is an enveloped virus, and you know of the recommendations that we have for use of alcohol. There are active ingredients in many hand sanitizers, and of course, we know the popularity. The alcohol in these hand sanitizers does not work effectively in the presence of visible dirt or organic matter, students. So, unlike phenol, wherein I said that there's a high penetration and it works even when there is organic matter present, alcohol has low penetration. Although alcohols are not sporicidal, they inhibit the process itself, the process of sporulation and germination. And one common use of alcohol is de-germing. अगर last class से तुम्हें याद हो, de-germing, which is actually bringing down the load in a particular section or region. So de-germing just before needle injection is done with alcohol. And alcohols are also used as tinctures with other antiseptics. So we will talk about iodine tinctures in the next slides. One more advantage of alcohol, of course, is that it's inexpensive, and for disinfection, it has a broad range for vegetative microbes, for killing vegetative microbes. But because of its high volatility, their effectiveness is only limited to just after application. I mean, it cannot be a long-term um, solution. Then aldehydes, they are very strong disinfecting chemicals which serve as alkylating agents actually, thereby inactivating enzymes and nucleic acids. So the alkylating agent formaldehyde is commonly used in a concentration of about 37%. You know it as formalin, or maybe even as a gaseous disinfectant. It's a strong disinfectant. Like I said, it's also broad spectrum and has the ability to kill not just the vegetative cells of bacteria, fungi. It can also kill viruses and endospores. So it's sometimes a convenient alternative because it is sterilization at low temperature. So heat sterilization is much more labor intensive. And glutaraldehyde with its two aldehyde groups acts faster than formaldehyde. It's commonly used as just a 2% solution for sterilization. And it's majorly used for sterilization of surfaces and surgical and medical equipment. So in the healthcare facility, it's of common use. However, with both formaldehyde and glutaraldehyde, the disadvantage is the irritation that it causes to the skin. So it is not used as an antiseptic. Instead, it's used only as a disinfectant. Ethylene oxide, it's also a type of alkylating agents and is used for gaseous sterilization. So you have these chambers wherein ethylene oxide sterilizers or gas chambers are it's called. It's highly penetrating. It can sterilize items within plastic bags. So if things like heaters, disposable items in laboratories and even in clinical settings can be sterilized by using ethylene oxide. Again, this is cold sterilization. So compared to heat sterilization, here you can even sterilize heat sensitive items. But like the other two, that is formaldehyde and glutaraldehyde, in fact, all the alkylating agents are so strong. There are reports of these being carcinogenic. And ethylene oxide is also known to be highly explosive. So these are to be used only under very controlled conditions, under very prescribed, following the prescribed norms. Mm, yeah, halogens, well, they are used for disinfection. The ones that are commonly used are iodine, chlorine, and fluorine. Iodine works by oxidizing cellular components, including sulfur-containing amino acids, nucleotides, and fatty acids. So basically destabilizing the macromolecules. It also works at the level of respiratory chain by blocking electron transport. So when you cover electron transport, probably sir will tell you how it blocks the electron transport chain. Often you use it as a tincture. So that is an alcohol solution, okay? But with iodine, the problem is that it causes staining and skin irritation. So it's not aesthetically favored. On the other hand, now more commonly an iodophore is used, which is a compound of iodine complex with organic molecule, which increases iodine's stability and in turn its efficacy as well. So the betadine that you use is an iodophore. Chlorine, another halogen commonly used for disinfection, uh, especially in municipal drinking water and even wastewater treatment plants, with the resulting hypochlorous acid producing the actual antimicrobial effect. And you're probably aware of sodium hypochlorite, which is the chemical component of household bleach. It's also used for disinfecting purposes. And hypochlorite salts are also used to disinfect swimming pools. Uh, there are, if you look at in Prescott, you might find more students. I'm only taking up just some of the very common ones which you have encountered. So heavy metals, these are in fact kind of the first chemical disinfectants to be used in history quite since ages. Heavy metals, they kill microbes by binding to proteins, thus inhibiting their enzymatic activity. And mercury is an example of a heavy metal that has been used for many years to control microbial growth, especially to treat syphilis. But its use has been discouraged with reports on its toxicity and environmental accumulation. So bioaccumulation was reported in fishes and other marine life. Silver has been used as an antiseptic. In fact, earlier drinking water was stored in silver jugs, and now even copper jugs are used. Silver nitrate drops were earlier, they were routinely used in the eyes of newborns to protect them against eye infection. They're also used in incorporated in catheters and bandages, rendering them antimicrobial. And there are several other heavy metals also. Copper, for example, is a common algicide, killing algae in swimming pools and fish tanks. Copper coatings are also popular now, becoming very popular with handle objects like doorknobs and cabinet hardware and other fixtures to reduce the spread of microbes. And last but not the least, surfactants are a group of chemical compounds that lower the surface tension of water. So they are the major ingredients in soaps and detergents. Soaps do not kill or inhibit microbial growth, so they are not considered as antiseptic or disinfectants. However, proper use of soap can mechanically remove microorganisms, so they're effective degerming agents. And some soaps contain certain bacteriostatic agents, like I mentioned, triclosan, so compounds or even other structurally related compounds that introduce antiseptic or disinfectant properties. Anionic detergents, such as those used for laundry, they have a negatively charged anion at one end attached to the long hydrophobic chain, whereas cationic detergents have a positively charged cation, of course, instead. And it's the cations which are very commonly used or very effective. So cationic detergents include an important class of disinfectants called the quartz or quaternary ammonium compounds. Named so because of this quaternary nitrogen atom that confers the positive charge. They have properties similar to phospholipids. So they have a hydrophilic and a hydrophobic end. They therefore can insert into the bacterial phospholipid layer and disrupt the membrane's integrity. They have quite a number of beneficial features, making them very common disinfectant. They are stable, they're non-toxic. Basically, everything that you talked about in the first slide of desirable features. They are odorless, tasteless, inexpensive, and so on and so forth. They're also active against, other than bacteria, they're active against fungi, protozoans, enveloped viruses. In fact, students, if you remember, enveloped viruses were very susceptible to agents compared to non-enveloped viruses. But endospores are unaffected by quartz. So quartz are also commonly found in household cleaners and disinfectants, mouthwashes even. That is about the chemical agents. I am not taking up chemotherapeutic agents, that is the antibiotics and stuff which are used for killing of the microbes internally. Yeah. Now, the first question is, we're talking of control and stuff. What do we mean when we say microbial death? Anybody? When we say death, it is very easy for you to understand death when you talk about higher organisms. What about death in, when do you say an organism is dead? Anybody?
Ma'am, when it is metabolically inactive?
Then it is dead. Really? Endospores?
Because we do not consider lysis. We discussed the case that lysis hone ke baad it is different. So that is why I went for this one.
Yes, but do you still say the VBNCs and the endospores are dead?
No, ma'am.
नहीं ना, तो metabolism नहीं हो सकता criteria, है ना? Because it is completely reduced. It is brought to a minimal in the case of such persisters or such strategies. Anybody else? Not take the vitals here, like you can for a higher organism. So basically, it's very hard to detect. It is generally accepted that if the organism loses its reproductive ability, even under optimum conditions, then it's called death for microorganisms. So when subjected to any of these control agents that we talked about, you will notice that the death rate is just like the growth rate. It is logarithmic. This is the plot of the log of remaining population number versus the time of exposure, and it's a straight line. So you see that the constant percentage of extant population is killed every minute. The efficiency of the control of these agents are a decimal reduction time, or the D value, which is the time required to kill 90% of the microbes in a sample at a specific temperature. So specification of temperature is important because it is one of the parameters which affects the efficiency of control, bringing one log down, and that is called as the D value. It's usually the temperature is written as a subscript. So if it's D121, you know that it's decimal reduction time at the temperature 121. And besides the D value, there's another important value, that is Z value. This is also used to describe the efficacy of control agents. It is defined as the temperature change required to change the D value by a factor of 10. So basically this change in temperature. So uh, while the D decimal reduction time was the here you have the unit as temperature, so it's degree centigrade. These are the two values which are commonly used, especially in the food industry, to determine the efficacy. And yeah, with that, I would like to come to the last topic for this module, which is the factors which affect the effectiveness of an agent. There are these 6 factors which are important. So, for example, the number of microbes, and it is clear from the curve that you saw. An equal fraction of population is killed during each interval. So, a larger population requires a longer time to die than a smaller population. And this is the same. So, whether you're talking of physical agents or chemical agents, it will be the same factors affecting the effectiveness of an agent. When you talk of the nature of microbes in the population, if a population has more of vegetative cells or rapidly growing cells or even younger cells, they are much easily destroyed than mature organisms. And even under those mature organisms, you will notice that there's some which are endospore forming, the others are not. So obviously the ones which are endospore forming will be much more resistant. But it also depends on the kind of bacteria. So in that scale that you saw, Mycobacterium tuberculosis was way up. In fact, this is the reason why I said it's also used as an indicator. Phenol is a tuberculocidal organism. So this is Mycobacterium tuberculosis is much more resistant compared to some of the other bacteria. Just trying to show you how different agents, whether it is physical or chemical agents, how they are effective in terms of killing endospores and killing vegetative forms. And this is the factor by which endospores are more resistant to these particular agents. Then coming to temperature and increase in temperature at which a chemical is used, chemical agent is used, it is often an increase leads to an enhancement in the activity. So frequently for application, what is done is a lower concentration of the disinfectant or the sterilizing agent is used at a higher temperature. And again, I just wanted to show you these two curves. So at 20-degree, an agent acting versus an agent acting at 45-degree, and this is how the curve looks like. Then the concentration or dosage of agent, well, in a small range, you will notice that if there is an increase in concentration, it will lead to an exponential rise in effectiveness. But this is not always the case. And I mentioned to you ethanol, wherein 70% ethanol was much more effective than 95% ethanol or even 100% ethanol. And I asked you to find out the reason. Okay. So while concentration or dosage is a factor, it does not work on a larger scale. The duration of exposure, the longer a population is exposed to a microcidal agent, the more organisms are killed, and this you saw in the graph that that I just showed to you. That is about the contact time. The local environment, yes, this is also an important factor. So, for example, if an agent is used at an acidic pH, in fact, heat at an acidic pH is much more effective. So, beverages and food that are acidic, like fruits and tomatoes, they are easily pasteurized than other commodities which have a higher pH, like milk. And if you remember from the class on biofilms that I took during my introduction wala lecture, biofilms, they have a matrix of organic material. So a lot of EPS is there, and that itself serves as a protective agent. So most of the physical and chemical agents are not efficient in the case of organisms which are a part of biofilms. In fact, this is also a reason why it's recommended that you first clean surfaces or medical or dental equipment so as to remove the organic matter before a chemical or physical agent is used. So even if you look at water treatment plants or a city's water supply, the first step is removal of the organic material, and only then is it treated, subjected to a physical or chemical agent. Yeah, this is just some comments that I've summarized about the different factors, whether it is pH, temperature, contact. I mean, this is exactly what we've discussed right now. This is just a news article that I could see on companies banning triclosan after the FDA ban. Yes, students, that will be it for controlling microorganisms. If there is any doubt, you may ask me. Any doubt even related to some of the other topics that are being that form a part of the syllabus of minor. कोई doubt नहीं है? Fine, then we will end the class. Okay, and we will meet now on when is it? 11th, right? Wednesday है क्या है? Justine?
Yes, ma'am.
Wednesday.
Wednesday ना? One I said.
Thursday will
Justine मेल मिल गई थी. Thursday है? क्या बोल रहे हो?
नहीं मैम,
Wednesday है बाबा.
Wednesday.
It's on 11th, हाँ. 11th को तो
हाँ,
खत्म हो रहा है ना?
exam
So
is
the
on
class the next class will be on 12th.
Yes.
yes.
हाँ, we will meet on 12th, right? 11th को वैसे पहले Teams पे आपको sign in करना होगा, ठीक है? Okay, students, then good wishes. And if there are any doubts, you can still mail me if you want to. If there's something very pressing, you can always mail me or the TAs, and we'll be ready to help you. ठीक है, पढ़ाई करिए आप लोग. Okay.